We're making our way through the various character classes in D&D, and I want to offer a perspective not only based on a player, sharing with you the thought process, the character tactica as I'm playing as a player, but also on the opposite side, going behind the DM screen and from the perspective of a DM, when I throw various encounters at these classes, what are some of the things that give me a hard time? What are some of the things that I can exploit? And we're looking to build this Tactica checklist, points to keep in mind for every character class. Now, certainly in D&D, there is no wrong way to play your character class. We explored the idea behind a fighter. You could do heavy armor, sword and board. You could do a finesse fighter dual wielding 2 axes. You could do a ranged fighter with a crossbow. I mean, there's a lot of ways to build out each kit. And I want to leave that up to you. But I feel like it's important. We don't want to become frustrated with our character class, especially if we're playing a game that's going to progress over multiple levels. You don't want to be 5 levels into your character and the campaign's going to take you to like level 15 or level 20 on there. So being aware of what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages, what are the things that work, what are the things that don't work, and what's your answer for that, whether it's through feats or maybe supplementing with a dual class or a multi-class, depending on the version of D&D you're playing. Maybe it's making it up with certain magic items. All these questions come into the equation to make sure you're getting the most fun out of your character class. Let's look at the monk. Most of the time, if I'm not playing a sorcerer or a wizard, I'm playing a monk. I really love the challenges of the monk. Yes, I love the narrative. Yes, I enjoy the martial arts and that perspective on it. But in my opinion, the monk is very unique because when we try to build a working model of the character classes in D&D, the monk breaks them in that it doesn't really fit anywhere. So let's look at this hierarchy really quick. And of course, we're going to cover it in more depth on a future podcast. Tier 1 frontline fighters. Barbarians, fighters, paladins. These are the character classes, lots of hit points, depending on the version of D&D, a very high armor class or a very low armor class, able to deal lots and lots of damage, able to take lots and lots of damage. Tier 2, an example would be the cleric. A battle cleric can be very, very powerful. Yes, these classes, a shaman would also be a great example. These character classes certainly have divine support or magic support, but they can also wear armor. They can also utilize weapons, and they've got a decent hit point pool. No, they're not going to go toe-to-toe with the most powerful monsters on the table, but they can certainly hold their own. Then we've got the third class, Tier 3. These are characters that deal their damage in a very finesse-type way. Thieves, rogues, assassins. They don't have the hit points to go toe-to-toe. They don't want to. Also because if they're going directly toe-to-toe or direct into the action, they're not using damage multipliers, they're not using sneak attacks, they're not using stealth, they're not using poison or other abilities in there. And then we have full support, arcane, druids. We look at wizards, we look at sorcerers, warlocks, character classes that don't have the hit points, don't have the armor, don't have the combat experience, but they make up for it tactically with the magic, both in direct damage dealing, but also in support type spells. So where does the monk fall into this category? The monk is separate from this category. And I want to make the argument or the discussion point in this vlog that here's why the monk falls out of this classification. And if you disagree, I'd love to hear it in the comments and get some feedback on there. Expand my knowledge of the monk, the way I think about the monk. So the monk has a lot of things that contradict each other. And in this contradiction, if you try to use it, taking advantage of some of the abilities that it has directly, it's going to get you killed. And you're going to be like, the monk is a subpar fighter. The monk is a subpar support type class. The monk is a subpar rogue stealth type class. The way the monk works, and we're going to look at the abilities in a second, is turn by turn, tactically, it is changing. We want to use the advantages of the monk to put us in a place on the table, whether it's tabletop with miniatures and moving, or just keeping track of combat stats, old school pen and paper in your mind. The monk wants to be in the place where it can create the most havoc for the DM. The monk wants to be in a place where the DM is tactically looking and saying, that monk is a problem. That monk is a pain with how it's utilizing. We want to match the monk's abilities with the encounter's disabilities and take it out that way. So tactically very challenging, turn by turn by turn, ever changing. This kind of creation deals with the fact that through the various editions of D&D, the monk certainly has a place in fantasy lore. You know, martial arts, martial warriors, kind of using the force, whether it's innate abilities or spirit points, key points, like in the current edition, various ways to explain it over these editions. But it's like the designers just didn't know what to do with the monk, how to replicate those superhuman type abilities into a pen and paper type game. That's led to some interesting approaches over the years. Now I'm going to be kind of overall combining the various editions of monks, because the back and forth, there's been changes, but the core class still remains the same. The biggest challenge is in AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, first edition and second edition. First, when the monk made its appearance. Second, where the monk came into some abilities to use weapons and weapons proficiencies. It was the most straightforward to utilize. You leveled up like in AD&D and you gained some abilities every other couple of levels. It was pretty straightforward. It was basically, look, we're just going to try and unlock this one tree. 3.5, 3.x, do I dare say Pathfinder in a D&D vlog? That changed the monk where now you had feats. Yes, you had some certain abilities that you can utilize, and you had the classic monk abilities, Quivering Palm and Stunning Blow. But now the feats opened up subclass ability. They opened up ways to personalize the monk and really focus and pull it in a specific direction. Then we move into the monk 4.0, which is just like every other character, daily at will power, use your power, healing surge. And I like 4th edition D&D, I still do. And now we're at 5th edition D&D, which I think has the most is the most interesting to play for the monk, because we have a lot of classic abilities like Quivering Palm and other things. But now with the ability to spend your points to activate abilities and having what were prestige classes in D&D 3.x now be the base classes as you level up, all of the abilities are open for you to pick. So I feel like this is the most diverse and well-played monk. But if you're coming from other editions, or you play this current edition of the monk and you're jumping into a previous edition, you're going old school AD&D, there's a lot of similarity. Let's dive right in here and start building that checklist. Okay, we've got armor class. This is the first thing that looks really good on paper, but completely falls apart, is essentially unusable at the lower levels, and at the medium to higher levels, at that point, armor class, whether it goes higher or lower, your version of D&D, it doesn't matter, because the things hitting you are so powerful. So I can't wear armor. I get that. Well, you can't have everything, right? I get that. The idea is the monk doesn't wear armor because, well, martial ability and acrobatics and the ability to sense danger and move out of the way and utilize all that kind of temple training in there, that martial training. So I don't wear armor, and it's reflected in my ability as I level up. I start dropping an armor class on there. The problem with this is, again, it's never going to get low enough. I'm not going to be able to wear, or high enough, good enough. Let's say good enough. It's never going to get good enough because I don't have access to heavy armor. Take a fighter, even with a minimal dex bonus, put on full plate, toss on a shield, and already your base is amazing. Not only with that base armor, before we get into rings and other protection options. Now when you have the base armor, as you level up and you get +1 full plate, +2 full plate, +1 shield, +2, +3 shields, it stacks and stacks and stacks. The monk just gets like the equivalent of like regular leather armor. Then as you level up, maybe scale armor. Then as maybe you level up more chain armor. It's not, you're stronger than a base wizard. But even a wizard, not that it's optimal, can spend spells, shield, mage armor, at the other levels, damage reduction like stone skins, mirror image to protect yourself. Even the mage is harder to hit than the monk. So good on paper, but falls apart. Also utilizing, what that means is if you're going to try and get your armor class down, or I should say good, what does that really leave you? Rings of protection, bracers of armor class, depending on the version of D&D. Again, it's never really going to get you amulets of protection. It's never really going to get you low enough on there. That's not to say I'm not going to throw on a ring of protection if I find it, but I'm not going to make armor class the focus of the monk. What that means is right away, before we even get into hit points, you can't go toe-to-toe. You can't fight with the front line on there. That's not to say I'm not going to throw myself in there if everything goes crazy and we're looking at a total party kill. But the monk is not charging in with the barbarian and the fighter. The pool of hit points. The pool of hit points is decent for a monk. It's on par with the cleric hit dice. But the challenge here is the cleric can not only get more out of the hit dice because of the armor class. Because remember, in D&D, first you got to hit. So if I can make it hard to hit, then essentially that's not doubling, but increasing my hit point pool on there, simply because I'm getting hit less. The cleric also has certain innate abilities through divine spells, to make it harder to hit or to automatically heal. Now, the monk gets lay on hands later, but we're starting to see where the monk is like, wait, the monk is a martial class. It's supposed to fight, but how is this working? Because the hit points are average, tier 2. They fit in there, but we don't have the armor class. Okay. We're not a frontline fighter. Let's talk about damage output. The idea of the fists do stock damage, and they level up 1d6, 1d8, 1d10. At certain levels, depending on the edition, they start to get magical bonuses. That is okay. The challenge, of course, is weapons always work a little bit better. Depending on the version of D&D, you've got access to short swords, scimitars, katana, staff, quarterstaff on there, and some of the martial monk-type weapons, a kama and other focus weapons like that. They work at the lower levels, but then at the mid to higher levels, now you're getting into something where those type of weapons, I'm going to need magical weapons to keep up, but the base attack unarmed with the bonuses to hit and the additional attacks make unarmed attacks better. So you're doing less damage, but you're getting more attacks. So what this means is the strategy, and that's not to say you can't use weapons at higher levels. I mean, you can. And we'll look at gold piece acquisition. That's where a monk has a huge advantage in terms of focusing magic items. At the earlier levels, if we're just looking pure stats, if we're looking just pure crunching the numbers here, pure D&D hammer, then math hammer, we're going to utilize weapons because I need to deal the most damage as possible. At the lower levels, you're fighting orcs, giant spiders, goblins, things like that. You could possibly kill them in one hit, and the armor class is such that if you roll about average, you're probably going to hit at the lower levels. When we move to the higher levels, you're not going to kill stuff on one hit, ever. I mean, even the fighters and the barbarians aren't. The armor class is going to be so high or low that, you're going to have to roll 16 or 17, 18, 16 or higher based on the D20, and then add on your adjustments and your magical bonuses and all that to make it work. At that point, damage becomes less important, and the ability to land as many attacks as possible becomes key. This is where we see the monk just on innate abilities really start to pull ahead and really start to, in my mind, go all, Kenshiro and just throwing that out, Fist of the North Star up there and lots of attacks. Add on to that some magic items that can increase the number of base attacks. You're rolling a lot of dice. And in D&D, even against harder type monsters, you roll those dice, even if you need a 19 or 20 to hit, if you've got 4, 5, 6, 8 attacks a turn, that's big. That's a lot. You're going to hit on getting lucky alone. In that case, the monk becomes surprisingly terrifying. Very, very terrifying with how it operates and how it works. So now we get to these situational abilities that are compounded by speed. The monk is the fastest unaugmented base class. You're going to move fast. That speed is going to increase. The rate depends on the version of D&D. You're going to get around pretty fast, and you really don't have to worry about encumbrance, even if your D&D, your dungeon master is a total, I'm tracking every gold piece that you're carrying on there, because you don't have the base weight of armor. I mean, even a rogue, studded leather armor adds a decent amount of weight once you start getting into your primary weapon, a backup weapon, some adventuring gear, some gold, some magic items. It does add up. So with the monk on there, the fact that you don't have armor means you're not going to usually become encumbered, even with your magic items and share of the treasure. And once we start layering on magic items, you're going to move even quicker on there, almost to the point where it's like haste, plus. The DM that is not ready for how fast a mid-level, properly built monk can move is insane. I mean, is absolutely insane. So we take our flurry of blows, we take our ability to move fast, and now we layer in, depending on the kit, stunning blow, fury of blows, quivering palm. That means if you can, and they unlock lower levels, stunning blow. You might have frost fist, depending if it's dark moon kit, things like that. Then when you move to the mid-tier and the higher tier of quivering palm and other things, now you have the speed to get into position. You have the flurry of attacks that even at something, as a DM, I'm like, yeah, I've got high armor class, I've got buffs up, I've got resistances, I've got stone skins. That monk just has to land one hit, bro. And yes, you're going to get a saving throw, and you're probably going to make the saving throw, but you might not make the saving throw. That's where things get really interesting. So tactically, as a monk, can you be in the right position at the right time with the right number of dice? That's a lot of what ifs, but tactically, and this is the wargamer in me, that's what makes the monk so exciting to play. Now, in a previous podcast that I pushed up to the channel here, we talked about leveling up, and this is the last piece. This is the last key of the monk. Key, K-E-Y, not K-I. The last piece of the monk that is very, very interesting, important, and excels compared to other character classes. And this is where, in a multi-adventure setting, where you're going to play a character that's going to go from level 1 to level 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and up, the monk becomes beast mode on this alone. If the DM is using the proper rules for D&D. So when you level up, really quick, I'm just going to summarize it so we kind of can follow my argument for the monk and how it operates. Certainly in the archives, we go into more detail. You level up with your character sheet and your abilities and your hit points, but in every adventure, you get a set amount of treasure, of gold. Take everything, the actual gold, the gems, the loot, the magic items, reduce it to how much gold is it worth. Every level you gain in gold, and you have to keep upgrading your gear, your character gear, whether you find it, whether you buy it, whether you have it created. The example I utilized, a +1 sword for a fighter, +1 longsword, first level fighter. Hey, that's pretty good. That's good. Level 6 or 7, you're still rocking that +1 sword. It's not keeping up with the challenge ratings on there. So you're constantly looking to level up your gear. The challenge with other character classes is they need to take their gold piece equivalency and spend it in multiple items. Think about the fighter for a second, and we're going to look at the fighter. You need to spend your gold to make sure your armor is increasing. Full, scale mail, chain mail, full plate +1, full plate +2, full plate damage resistance, shield +1, shield +2. Your armor needs to move up. Ring of protection +1, ring of protection +2, amulet, this and that. It moves up. So you're spending gold on that. Then you're spending gold on your primary weapon. +1 sword, +2 sword, +3 sword, +3 sword, plus fire shock. You need to spend money there. You need to spend money on wondrous items to make you move faster, boots of speed, other ways to protect you. You're going to need rings. You're spending your gold in all these areas. The monk, you're going to start out, if you start out with a weapon focus. I mean, you could go right to fists, level 1. I've played that way. It's not as effective, but you can. You're going to be spending your gold to get like a +1 quarterstaff or, +1 scimitar. At about +2, then it stops. Then you're going to want to switch over to fists proper. So you're saving gold. Your equivalency of every level up of gold, you're saving. Armor, you're not buying armor. You're not buying shields. You might do a ring of protection. You might do some other things. Speed, you already have a good amount. Every character class is going to need to increase their speed and also go Top Gun, go vertical on there. So some sort of boots of levitation, cape of flying, boots of flying, things like that. The monk will want those on there. But again, you're pouring all of your gold into those areas. You don't really need to worry about weapons. You don't need to worry about armor. Speed, you can let slide for a little while, depending on what you want to focus on. This means the bulk of your gold is going to get tossed into wondrous items and interesting items to layer over your attacks with your fists, and interesting items that might be able to be utilized one-off, but you got to get into the right position for it. But you can, because you have the speed, because you have the ability. The monk really lets you customize and focus your magic item acquisition in very, very unique areas. That's not to say you can't do it with other character classes. You could do it with a fighter, but that means you've made concessions. Because what a DM is supposed to do by the rules is, based on the challenge rating and the experience level, hand out certain amounts of gold or treasure equivalent to the party. They're going to use that for gear. They're going to use that for supplies. They're going to use that for consumables, scrolls, and potions. But that should be keeping pace with the actual level that they are. The monk only really needs to spend it in 1 or 2 areas instead of 4 or 5. Wizards are an absolute gold piece hog on there. That puts the monk in a very, very unique and interesting place to play. This was only supposed to be maybe like a 10-minute Tactica podcast. So I pushed that out there for the monk, one of my favorite character classes. And again, building a checklist, being aware of what the monk can do, and figuring out how do you want to play a monk, or in this case, any character class, for this run-through of D&D, so you don't get stuck playing a character that dead ends. So you don't get stuck playing a character that you don't want to play. You can get that vision, you can get that voice out of the character you are playing.